Enjoy with your headphones for a better listening experience.
Please watch till the end of the video to have you most scariest part of the video.
Those who've experienced sleep paralysis, what happened? I once dreamt that someone was in my apartment, and I could hear footsteps outside of my door. I couldn't move at all, couldn't turn my head, or move limbs, just stared at the ceiling with my heart pounding. I knew in my dream that it was someone bad. I heard the doorknob to my room turn and he came into the room and crawled on the bed. I finally managed to wake up at that moment, but it was terrifying. Also, I often dream that I'm sleepy and I can't open my eyes. In my dream, I will see tiny slivers of what's going on, but I can never fully open them. It's frustrating as hell. Recently, I started being able to recognize when it's happening in my dream and can wake myself up, which is kind of cool. The first time was when I was 12. There was a shirt or something hanging off my brother's bed in front of me. I kept picturing it coming to life as a panther and coming to my face. Then it would go back to normal and loop. At the same time, the fire detector was also looping, and it would look normal, and then transform into the crypt keeper. The last time it happened, I heard a bunch of angry yelling. My friend saw long black fingers slip around her and slowly bent all her fingers back, and she eventually woke up. I hope that never happens to me. It happened when I was like 6 years old. I was pinned down to my bed. Nothing really happened except that I felt like someone was behind me. It sounds really cliché, but it's like you know someone's behind you even though you're not looking. You see every detail. And hear everything. I was hearing footsteps on the roof. I don't know why. I was crying at that point. I my mouth as I cried, but the thing was I couldn't hear myself. I felt that I was crying, but I did not hear it. Every sound you hear, even if it's nice, sounds horrific. Outside the window, I saw this clown I always had nightmares about, but this time it was more realistic. Sleep paralysis feels like it's real. After a few years, I learned what it was. It happened one time after that, but since I knew what it was, it didn't really scare me. I remember thinking, fuck you ghost, you're a piece of shit. I purposely became angry instead of scared. When I woke up, I started laughing. I've had sleep paralysis twice, several years apart. The second time it happened, nothing interesting happened. I couldn't move, could hardly breathe, but I could see and hear perfectly. The first time it happened, though, I woke up to my bedroom door opening slowly. I could move my eyes, but still couldn't move my body and had trouble breathing. After my door opened all the way, a figure in a black robe hovered into the room and paused at the foot of the bed. Small creatures that looked like flayed dogs were running around the room and skittering over my bed. The figure motioned at me, laughed, and told me I'd never open my eyes again. My response was to force myself to sit up, feeling like I was moving through molasses, glare at it, and scream HAH. Then I collapsed back onto the bed, fell asleep, and wondered why I wasn't terrified during my hallucination. This happens to me too often. I've had ones where I've been falling into a vortex, to getting stabbed and screaming. But I'll share with you the most horrific one I've had. I wake up on the couch, but notice I can't move. It's about 3 a.m. and I'm a little freaked out. The doorway into the hallway is within my view, and there in the corner I see a shadow. I try to shake it off, so I look at the ceiling. Curiosity prevails, and I look again, only this, it's closer. I try to shut my eyes, but I feel a cold hand on my forehead as I look, and I see a shadow standing over me. I scream and scream, but to no avail, no one hears me. I wake up relieved that it was only a dream, only to be in sleep paralysis again. To start off, I was the only one at home at the time and had never experienced it before in my life. I was lying down on the couch reading and ended up falling asleep. Suddenly, my eyes opened, and I heard laughing in my right ear and garbled speech, and I had absolutely no control of my body. The feeling was probably the worst thing I have ever felt and felt like a panic attack, except a bit more intense. The next thing I knew, I saw myself from above, as if I were floating near the ceiling and looking down at my body. After that, I regained control of my body and jolted up while covered in sweat. Nothing like that has happened to me since. I've had it a few times. The creepiest is below. I was in a normal dream. Suddenly, I realized the scenario of the dream made no sense because of the random assortment of people in it. It then felt like I woke up. Once I opened my eyes, I found that I couldn't move my body. I would try as hard as I could, but the harder I tried, the more it felt like my consciousness was almost being sucked out of my body or something. It's really hard to describe the feeling, almost like reality was tearing apart. This whole time I could hear footsteps coming up the stairs in my room. They kept coming, and I kept panicking while I tried harder and harder to move. Then I realized I didn't have stairs in my room and immediately woke up. Oh, I'll tell you what happened all right. It's only happened once, but I remember it with a ridiculous amount of clarity. I know it was daylight savings time around 6:30 in the morning. It was light outside, but I fell back asleep. Then the sleep paralysis happens out of nowhere. I wake up and it's completely dark in my room. Only lighting came from my alarm clock, which illuminated a small red section in my room. Everything else was black. A muffled RHCP song was playing backwards, and I could very well sense something sitting in the shadows in front of my closet. I just remember trying to catch my breath and telling myself it wasn't real and to wake up, which I did. It was regular daylight and there was no music playing. It's nothing compared to everyone else, but it still creeps me out. I woke up on my side looking away from my window. Something blurry was by my bed and I just assumed it was something with my eyes. However, the longer I sat there, the more I began to realize it was two legs and someone standing over me. I felt a hand come down over my back and my chest began to tighten. I snapped out of it and didn't sleep well again for nearly 4 years. I remember waking up from a short power nap in my parents' truck and I woke up not being able to move, and it was really hard to stay awake, and I thought, so this is what this is like, and fell back asleep. My sister also experienced this, although her story is worse. She experienced paralysis when she woke up from a nightmare and couldn't move, so she was scared, and she started sleeping on the couch in my room from then on. I was visiting my grandparents for a week, so I was sleeping on the floor in my cousin's room there. He had a night light. Well, when I woke up, the night light was casting a dark red light. I started panicking and tried to move, but it felt like I was being held completely down. Like when you're wrestling, and you're pinned, and the other guy won't let you up. And I looked up and there was a very tall, black figure standing over me, just looking at me. It was skinny and honestly looked like a gray alien, but it was so dark it didn't have any features. I only had it happen to me once. I had a dream in which the space shuttle was taking off, no rocket, just the shuttle, and it failed during takeoff, tipping over and crushing me. I immediately woke up, eyes open, and found that I couldn't move or talk. I thought something terrible had happened that left me completely paralyzed. The effect probably only lasted 10 seconds, maybe, but it was awful. Yes, at first I was terrified because you hallucinate when it happens, and often you can see a monster or murderer or shadowy demon off to the corner of your room but can't respond because you're paralyzed. Over time, however, I got used to it. I know the immense fear is just a result of my mind being stuck between a half-awake, half-sleep state, so I just close my eyes and concentrate on wiggling my toes to snap myself out of it. I can actually get myself into that state when I'm in bed. It's kind of exhilarating. No, I don't get out much. Suffered from insomnia for about a year, and I'm quite sure that the combination of insomnia and night terrors was just a vicious cycle. I would be lying in bed, unable to sleep, usually with my eyes open. Often I would hear loud noises, more distant at first and then banging on the walls of my second-floor bedroom. Dark, bodiless figures floating towards me. Occasionally they would scream or try to talk to me. I could see my entire bedroom but couldn't move to wake myself out of it. Eventually, they would just kind of end on their own. It was almost every night that I'd experienced something like this. I haven't experienced sleep paralysis like this since then, but I still experience dreams where I'm half awake and half asleep. I usually snap in and out of reality when this happens. I also had issues with a recurring dream when I was a kid. In the dream, I would get out of bed, walk to the top of the stairs, and stand for a bit before jumping off of the top of the stairs. I would always wake up before I hit the floor in the dream. It's intense and horrible. Every time it happens to me, I honestly believe that if I don't move I will die. I try to tell myself that it's okay, but panic always sets in at some point. The only way I can describe it is like two interlocking gears that are stationary and that I have to use every ounce of strength in my body to start them moving. There is no control, just absolute panic to muster the energy to roll over, or move in some way, to get rid of whatever is crushing my entire torso. The worst experiences are when I manage to move somehow, but then go right back into the panic state and have to do it all over again. It's traumatic. I had an amazing revelation years ago when it happened while I was with my ex-girlfriend, and she said that my foot was twitching like crazy, which I never realized at all. I told her that if it ever happens again, to keep rolling me back and forth until I can talk and tell her to stop. That worked beautifully when it happened while she was there, and I was able to focus on swinging my foot while she rocked me until I could move again. Thankfully, I've never had any hallucinations, which would make it so much worse. It started for me a few years ago, after I had woken up to a small earthquake. I live on the New Madrid Fault, so earthquakes are something I've heard about my whole life. I was just barely able to feel it and thought it might be a train going by until the glass on my nightstand fell off. It took me a bit to wake up and run to the doorway. After this, I had sleep paralysis pretty regularly for a few years. It was always the same. It'd start when a train went by. Where I am in town, I could feel the trains shaking the house for a minute or two before they ever reached an intersection and blew their horn. During this time, I'd start to wake up, feel the bed shake, know it was an earthquake, and feel a sudden urge to get up and run. I'd lay there in bed, terrified, wanting to run and take cover, but being unable to do anything but lay there. Eventually, I'd come out of it and realize it was just a train. This doesn't happen much anymore, and it wasn't until fairly recently I learned what sleep paralysis was. Everything I've read about it pretty well describes these episodes I had on the train. I get sleep paralysis, but thankfully not terrifying hallucinating SP. It's like my mind is awake, but my body is still asleep. I can see through my eyes, but I can't move them much and just sort of look out from my semi-open eyelids. Someone else pointed out the anxiety of telling your body to move. And it just doesn't. It's horrible, like a claustrophobic feeling. I can't imagine it with hallucinations, but fortunately I sleep on my stomach and never look around much except at my hand, which I usually desperately try to lift. Sometimes I get SP, but during a dream, last time I was just laying by a pool at a resort. No red-eye goblins hopping around my crotch, thankfully. I can't be certain that what happened was sleep paralysis, but it certainly felt like it at the time. I was up late watching a couple of friends get their asses beat in Dark Souls. I was nice and comfortable on a fluffy chair when I guess I passed out. I didn't transition to sleep like I'm used to, as I was still awake and aware of my surroundings. I felt about a dozen or so invisible hands holding me firmly against the chair and heard screams coming from a nearby room, like people were being brutally murdered. I tried to cry out, to say anything, but I couldn't move my mouth or make a sound above a whisper. I panicked for a moment, but realized what was happening and calmed myself down. Years prior, I had watched Discovery Special debunking possession and alien abduction stories that offered sleep paralysis as a possible explanation for what the victims experienced, and this seemed pretty similar. I woke up moments later, my heartbeat still elevated and a few drops of cold sweat on my brow. Not a fun experience, but definitely an interesting one. I've had it a few times, always when I'm sleeping on my back. The freakiest time was when I started to hallucinate that someone came into my room and slowly walked over to my bed and stood over me. The other times I feel like I've been picked up by some invisible force and flung around the room. I felt like I had come flying off my bed and was spinning around on my floor. Sometimes it can actually be quite exhilarating. 2 incidents come to mind. The first happened during an afternoon nap. I woke up but couldn't move. I realized I was asleep, but I just could not move. Then I slowly lifted off the bed and some sort of demon started threatening me. The second happened around 3 to 4 o'clock in the morning. I again woke up but couldn't move. Then to my relief I woke up again, but still couldn't move. It seemed like this happened for 10 to 20 minutes, with me waking up paralyzed 20 to 30 times. I've experienced sleep paralysis occasionally since middle school. I didn't even know what it was until one of my friends told me about it. When I was younger, it mostly happened when I was falling asleep. When I realized it was happening, it felt like I was falling asleep wrong somehow, and I would get this sudden, sure sense of being about to die if I didn't start moving right that second. So, I would try with all my might to roll back and forth. I can only fall asleep on my side, and it was so terrifying that I couldn't make any movements, and I felt like I couldn't breathe, and I was so sure I was going to die. And then I would move and be okay, like, what the fuck just happened, brain? Later in high school, and now in college, it happens less often, but until more recently, I'd never seen or heard or felt anything like people say you do. Terrifying demons and all that. The one time that happened, I was in bed on my left side, facing the wall. I sleep in a slim bed, and the blanket is far too large and spills over onto the floor by a lot. Sometime in my tossing and turning and trying to get to sleep, the blanket came untucked from behind me and part of it was in the floor, but I didn't bother with it. Cue being nearly asleep when the paralysis sets in without me realizing it quickly enough, and I can't move. I try rocking back and forth, but I can't, so I figure I'll just wait. Then, I get this feeling of the blanket being pulled from behind me, like something's behind my back and in the floor gently pulling it, and my body's turning with it. The sudden sureness of, I'm about to die in my bed and I can't move or scream or do anything, had always accompanied the paralysis for me before, but only because that thought was just, like, there. I knew there was nothing in my bedroom floor pulling my blanket. I knew that. But it felt so real, and I'd never been more terrified and frustrated at my inability to move and so afraid of being turned all the way over and seeing what was pulling the blanket. Then I could move again, and I rolled over, and nothing was there. Nothing had ever been there, and the blanket was barely on the floor at all, but I was nervous and had to get out of bed for a while and look at Reddit. I have had a couple of bouts of sleep paralysis in the past. Both times it happened most nights for almost 2 weeks. I would feel something jumping frantically on my bed, starting at the bottom and working its way up to me. I never saw it, but for some reason I just knew it was sinister. I would have my eyes open, but would not be able to move or make a noise. I would try and scream or shout for help, but not so much as a whisper would come out. Eventually, after desperately trying to scream, I would manage a little squeaking noise, and that is when I would just snap out of it. I haven't had it in a while, but I'm pretty intrigued as to what causes it. I've broken my sleep paralysis into 3 major periods. In chronological order, they are the old woman, the demon, and the suffocation. I'm 23 years old, and the earliest memory I have of sleep paralysis occurred around the age of 12. I was having a dream which turned pointedly dark, the skies, the theme, the general tone blackened, and I felt a sharp jab in my ribs. My eyes opened to an old, ugly woman sitting directly on my chest, making it impossible for me to breathe. I was frozen completely, couldn't blink at all. At some point I snapped out of it, which is still all I can hope for when it happens, and stayed awake for the rest of the night, scared out of my mind. This happened once every 2 weeks or so, sharp jab, old woman, snap out of it. Then, one night about 5 years later, the demon came. I remember the dream so vividly. I dreamed I had been possessed by the devil. I couldn't move on my own, I was slaughtering my friends against my will, doing horrible things. I was familiar with the onset of the paralysis by now, I could recognize it coming. I forced my eyes open, expecting the old woman, but this time it was different. There was a 3-foot-tall demon at the foot of my bed. Red, pockmarked, slimy and evil, it stared at me for a minute, screeched, and I snapped out of the paralysis. This happened bi-monthly for the next 4 years. Once I started sharing a bed with my now fiancé, the apparition stopped coming. No more shadow people. No demon, nobody. Now, I just nearly hyperventilate and suffocate. When it happens, I usually feel a very urgent sense of danger. I've found that I can sort of control my breathing when it happens, so I start to breathe very loudly in short bursts until my fiancé recognizes shit's weird, wakes up, and shakes me awake. I'd like to just mention that this is a terrible thing. It's horrifyingly scary to have no control of your body, and to not be quite awake enough to jar yourself out of sleep. You feel like you're about to suffocate, about to die. The apparitions are terrifying, truly terrifying. And I never know if I'm going to get a decent night's rest or have a paralysis episode. For years, I thought I was alone with this, and then the internet showed me there were others. My parents never listened to me about it, and I would give anything to make it stop. It's comforting, in a way, to know I'm not the only one that sits there, completely vulnerable at night, while old witch women, shadow people, and demons try to suffocate me. Sleep paralysis is pure terror. I experienced sleep paralysis a few days ago. Though I didn't see any shadows or figures when I woke up. It was freaky though, but it's the first time this has happened to me in a while. I was laying on my back. I read that apparently sleep paralysis happens more frequently when you sleep that way. It was the worst. And I had my mouth open and was paranoid a bug would crawl inside. But then I just ended up falling asleep again. I hope I'm one of those people that only has to go through that experience on rare occasion. Definitely don't want to go through that again. Last night, I experienced my first sleep paralysis. 3 a.m., I was in the midst of falling asleep when I woke up. I found myself staring up into the ceiling and feeling this overwhelming dense presence of fear and anxiety. The force was tormenting me, and it felt as if my body was being pulled by unseen hands from every direction. My vision was wavy and blurry. I tried to scream for help, however, nothing came out of my mouth. At this point, I was panicking like mad, trying desperately to break free of this malevolent force. My breathing was quick yet suppressed. It felt like I was inside a low-pressure environment. I lost track of time in the process. Soon, I was able to break free of this force and started screaming, and after that I found myself wide awake and shivering in fear. Realizing I was conscious, I went back to sleep and fell asleep in 2 minutes or so. I woke up after a hard night of drinking. It was New Year, and my drink had been spiked by someone I used to fight with in grammar school. When I woke up, I saw these rods lying across from me. It looked kinda like dark aluminum rods about the thickness of a thumb, a bit more. Somehow I knew it was plutonium rods, and that I would be ducked if I didn't move. Everything else was normal, and I was awake. I was just sleepy and confused, and when it dawned on me that the rods weren't there, I had a good laugh and they disappeared. I think I saw the rods, because I couldn't move, so my still sleepy brain made up a reason for my newfound handicap. This might be what happened to people back in the day with the mare riding them, nightmares. I think so anyway. I've had it happen to me a few times. It has happened when I'm in the middle of a bad dream and try to wake myself up. You know, when you're on the verge of sleep, but still having a dream? Well, it's kinda like that, but you can't move, and in my experiences I've been in bad dreams. The most notable occurrence was when I was at a cabin with my family. I stayed by myself on the downstairs floor on a couch by myself. So, I guess I was already having a bad dream and trying to wake myself up. I was laying on my back and on the verge of sleep and dreaming. I guess either my eyes were opened, or I just remembered what the room looked like from how I was laying down, but I was laying on the couch and saw a big black mass or entity or cloud or something, and it rushed towards the couch, and I could have sworn I felt it shake the couch. The whole time I couldn't move and woke up in the same position on my back. So, in my experiences, it's been my coming out of a dream and unable to move or speak. My girlfriend says I've started to shake and mumble because I'm trying so hard to move and wake myself up. Not very fun. I had a dream where I was falling. After the initial panic, I realized I was dreaming. I was enjoying myself as it was a lot like skydiving. I still had the falling feeling in my stomach and allowed myself to go for a while. Well, I grew bored and decided it was time to wake up, but when I tried, I couldn't. I tried harder and it got harder for me to breathe. I tried to move my arms, but they were not moving. Every time I tried to wake up it got harder and harder to breathe. It got to the point where I had stopped breathing and for a good 45 or 60 seconds I was in full panic in my head. I was falling into a dream and aware that in the waking world I was no longer breathing, while unable to move or wake. Finally, my lungs took manual control and with a great thrust forced my breathing to start again and woke me at the same time. Pretty crazy. First off, at the time I was deeply religious and spiritual, so you can imagine it terrified me even more so than the average Joan. I woke up, opened my eyes, but couldn't move, my skin was tingling. So, all I could do was look around my room, but I saw shadows walking towards me, so I closed my eyes in fear, praying to wake up. Almost immediately after closing my eyes, I felt a pressure on my chest as if something were sitting on me and heard a deep voice talking softly and menacingly into my ear. I can't remember what it was saying, because I was so terrified. Finally, I woke up and had to sleep the rest of the night with the lights on. It was extremely hard for me to sleep for about 2 months afterwards. I finally sucked it up and Googled it. Found out about sleep paralysis and was so relieved. It was still hard for me to sleep though, 'cause even though it had an explanation it was still terrifying to experience. I only had this happen once, that I can remember, and all I can recall during the experience is my eyes opening and then trying to move, but I couldn't, which, obviously, freaked me out, and a weird feeling. The weird feeling was all over my body. It was kind of a tingly warm feeling, which was actually kind of nice, except that the good feeling was completely drowned out by the fear that I somehow slept wrong and had woken up quadriplegic. The last thing I remember, keep in mind this was all in the span of probably 5 seconds, is falling almost immediately back to sleep and then waking up sometime later. When I woke up for real, I couldn't help but make sure that I could move. I've had this happen a couple times to me actually. When I was younger, I'd have hallucinations with them, and those were the scariest things ever. One had me stuck in my bed while a giant wolf came into my room, sniffing around with blood all over its mouth, and I knew it was going to eat me. Another time a marching band came in through the door and would march around the room a couple times until I snapped out of it, usually by forcing myself to sleep. Lately though, when it happens the few times it does, I don't see anything. I just get stuck there and can't move anything. For some reason, the marching band was always the one that would scare the shot out of me the most. Also, not sure if it's related, but I'd always think my limbs grew to ridiculous sizes, and sounds were extremely loud, like even the background ambient noise would be deafening. Sleeping sucked when I was a kid. I'm 18 now and I've had it for as long as I can remember, usually once every 2 weeks, and it tends to happen in the morning when I'm having a lie-in, and I'm just about to drop back off to sleep again. I just become aware that I can't move, my eyes are open, but I don't really see anything. To get out of it, I try and move my fingers and my toes, but that requires a bit of patience. So now, when I realize I'm in sleep paralysis, I take about 5 seconds to calm down and muster up all the strength inside my body, and I physically jolt myself awake. It works quite well, then I usually fall back to sleep, but properly this time. I've read about people seeing things and having weights pressed down on their chests. That's never happened to me, however. In my most recent case of SP, I realized I couldn't breathe properly. I could breathe in, but I couldn't exhale. It was terrifying. For some reason I get sleep paralysis really often. I think it's due to the ease I have to lucidly dream. Even though it's frequent, I panic most of the time that it happens. It's really difficult not to. Just imagine being half asleep and dreaming. It occurs mainly if you wake up during REM sleep, so brain activity is at its highest, and suddenly you're aware that you were dreaming but can't do anything about it. Anyway, the times that really stand out have all been scary. The first time this happened, I was facing upwards, and I heard some deep demonic voice moving around me and saw smoke/fog around. At this point, I couldn't even close my eyes and just had to deal with the possibility of a demon inside my room. Other times have involved the feeling of something grabbing me, seeing other weird things, and, on that one great occasion, Anna Kendrick being in the room. I woke up and was completely aware of my surroundings, but I could only lie there. The only movement I could consciously control was being able to blink my eyes and look around, but I couldn't move any other muscle in my body. There was also a sensation of just a crushing weight on my chest, which made it very difficult to breathe normally. It felt like a slow suffocation. It's only happened to me once, but it's an extremely scary feeling when you don't know what you're dealing with at first. My dad had an episode of sleep paralysis earlier this year as a part of adjacent into his chronic condition Crohn's disease. He said it felt like a dream-like trance. We started hallucinating hearing a voice that said, "You're crossing over now," and had a panic attack. I've never seen my dad cry like that. He was a complete and total mess. He felt like he was going to die. At the time, I thought this was a negative reaction to his pot brownie med, but later learned it was sleeping paralysis. It used to happen to me a number of times when I was younger. The scariest of which was the last time I experienced it. I woke up and realized I couldn't move. Usually, I just think of it as an annoyance and wait to gain feeling. However, this particular time I found myself face down in my pillow, unable to breathe. I tried to move, but couldn't, not even to roll to my side, so my airway was no longer blocked. After what felt like forever trying to move my body, the sleep paralysis started to wear off, and I quickly rolled to my side, gasping for air. Took a little while longer until I was able to fully move my body. So, I wake up and try to move to a comfortable position, but my arms don't move. I realize that I have sleep paralysis, and I continue to try to move, but nothing happens. After what feels like an hour, probably only 30 seconds, I see a mysterious figure out of the corner of my eye that I can't quite make out. I was sweating beads when it began to move closer to me, and I was filled with fear, knowing that I was helpless and looking directly at it. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. It, as I am not sure what it really was just standing right in front of me, not doing anything while I was passively freaking out. I somehow got my ability to move, and I mopped the duck under the covers and did not sleep for the rest of the night. It was not a good night. For me, it usually happens when I'm in the stage of nearly waking up and having certain dreams. It's horrible. Usually it starts with a nightmare, which for me is usually some sort of Picasso horror story that gets too lucid for me to think I'm dreaming. Before an episode though, I usually cannot breathe in the dream, which seems to make me not breathe outside of it as well. I wake up and I'm just literally stuck in that position I was previously in, unable to move, halfway in that nightmare of a dream, and somehow not breathing. That really sucks. Okay, so, I do a lot of lucid dreaming, aware dreaming. One of the techniques is going into sleep paralysis from being awake, w.i.l.d, wake-induced lucid dream. You do this by lying on your back comfortably in bed and trying not to move. Any thoughts you get, you try not to focus on. Anyways, I attempted w.i.l.d and things started off fine. I'd been lying back for some time and my eyelids felt funny. It was then I heard a terrifying smash. I opened my eyes, and where my bedroom window was, this shadowy figure started to make his way towards me. I noped the duck out and attempted to get up, but because I was in sleep paralysis, my body would not move. It felt like I had a thin blanket on top of my body, which was incredibly heavy. I start freaking the hell out, and suddenly I break out of sleep paralysis. As soon as I did, the shadow creature disappeared and I was able to move. Safe to say I haven't bothered with w.i.l.d since, but I lucid dream easy enough anyway. Sleep paralysis is some crazy. I was in the middle of the scariest nightmare of my preteen life. Usually, when I'm in the middle of a nightmare, I have the ability to force my eyes open and force myself awake. That time though, when I forced myself awake, my body felt wrong. I couldn't move at all, and my body proportions were completely screwed up. Then I felt a bunch of sharp pains, like hooks digging into my body. The thing from my dream started dragging me back through my bed into the dream. I'm aware now, looking back, that it was really just me falling back asleep after a short bout with sleep paralysis. But at the time I was ducking terrified. I get sleep paralysis all the time. I've actually had to stop reading before bed because I would wake up in SP almost every night after reading. I'll probably be the only person here who's not going to say it's the worst thing in the world. I've always been a lucid dreamer and have been experimenting with my dreams all my life. I'd get SP occasionally as a kid, but I never really paid any mind to it until I had my first audio hallucination. After that it became more common, and I got pretty interested in it. When I went to college, I spent some time with it, and eventually trained myself to wake up into it on purpose so I could experiment. It was interesting for a while, but eventually, I just valued my naps too much to bother with it. The worst thing about it is that it is extremely difficult to stay away from what I call dream logic. Basically, it's extremely hard to rationalize things in a normal way because your brain is still very much in dream mode, and it wants to believe what's happening is real. I think my experience as a lucid dreamer really helps with this. Overall, I've had monster climb on top of me, I've felt myself getting dragged off the bed, heard my people talking behind me, seen things crawling under the door, and I've even woke up out of sleep paralysis into another dream, often in a dream in which I'm also in SP. At this point, I just find it to be an annoyance. Like, great, now I have to struggle to wake up and then try to get back to sleep. Just a note, what I've found to be the best way to snap out of it is to try as hard as you can to jerk your head to one side. You might feel your head jerk slightly or part of your face move. This is your brain playing tricks, but it means you're almost out, so keep trying. I had it once. I dreamt that there was this dark alley where people get dragged to where this doctor would harvest their organs, and for some reason I was taken to this alley. In the dream I felt conscience, but I couldn't move, and as he started operating, I could see everything he was doing and even feel it. I slowly started waking up, and the dark alley slowly started to turn into the hallway of my house, which I could see if I slept on my side and left the door open, which I almost always did. It took a good 10 minutes before the dark alley became the hallway and the surgeon disappeared. For about 3 hours I laid on my side in the fetal position freaking out. I kept thinking that if I didn't move it'd be over soon. I recently experienced my very first sleep paralysis. It was terrifying, let me tell you. There was a dark figure that appeared in my peripheral vision. This was something I've never experienced before, so you can imagine how I felt. I tried to scream, but I couldn't. Now what I'm about to say may sound made up and ridiculous, but I swear it's true. This figure gave me a very intense. There was nothing sensual about it at all. Her head was thrusting so viciously just thinking about it gives me the creeps.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.